As I said, I'm Julia Hoffman. Excuse me, I'm Associate Director of Graduate Career Development in the Career Center. And also before we start, I should mention a few things. One, I don't know if it's been the same with everybody else, but my internet has been crazy this week. So if I start breaking up or something, if somebody can just either unmute yourselves and say so or put something in the chat, then I'll figure out an alternate arrangement so you can hear me. And another thing as well, I'm happy to take questions at any time, so please don't be afraid to jump in with a question. Just totally unmute yourself. Don't worry if it feels like you're interrupting, you're not. Or you can put something in the chat. Typically, it's a little easier for me to hear somebody if you just like jump in and unmute. But if you put something in the chat, I'll get to it. It's just that I'm not going to check it I'm only going to check it periodically, basically. So before we get started, any questions at the outset? Oh, and one more thing too, I have to say that the way I have two screens and the way Zoom is set up, I can see my screen, but I can't see any of you. So if somebody's waving around frantically, I can't see anybody's video, but I can see the chat or I can hear you if you jump in. So, okay, so I don't hear any of that. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Welcome to this workshop. What I'm gonna be talking about is really something, when Sanai had asked for this workshop, she was saying that it would be really helpful for our grad students to have a workshop on how to plan professionally during such an uncertain time. Of course it's COVID, but there are just so many uncertainties about right now. So I just wanted to focus on that. For people who have attended previous workshops recently or webinars that we have on Handshake, some of this might be a bit of a repeat. If that's the case, that's because it's just really, really important. And I want to make sure as many people hear it as possible. But a lot of this is new as well. So let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, so in terms of, your plans now, of course, so many people, like everyone's world basically has changed totally drastically compared to what it was, just less than a year ago. But even though now it can be pretty difficult to predict the future, not that it ever is easy, but especially now, there are certain things you can do in your professional planning that are definitely within your control. And then I'm going to be focusing, of course, on those here because there are things you can do. So the best thing overall that you can do right now is no matter where you're at in the professional planning process, it could be, you're just starting this year with grad studies, or maybe you're looking ahead and graduation is just around the corner. But the best thing you can do is just create as many options for yourself as possible. And I'll be talking about how to do that in this presentation. So for example, if you've been planning really and only focusing on the academic market, now it's really the time, and it's not too late. Now is the time to start looking into roles in industry or government labs that could potentially fulfill your love of research, for example. So just think about what is it that brought you to your interest in a particular career field, if you do have a focus. And if you're feeling like you'll need to spread out those options a little bit because maybe the field is contracting, think about what are those interests that brought you there in the first place, and where can you find those elsewhere? Or for example, if your field is pretty closely adjacent to something that's hiring. So for example, if you're working on something that's relatively close to vaccine or drug delivery, then you can think about how do you represent your transferable skills. Even if you don't have exact industry experience, you can still talk about how the things you have done build your transferable skills. And of course, one thing I do want to just plug is for all of these conversations, these are very individualized. They vary widely depending on people's circumstances and readiness for job searching and all of that. So I just want to say that we have appointments available at the Career Center for all students, but I want to say that we have a specialized graduate career team. I focus mainly on meeting with PhD students, and then we also have a team who focuses on meeting with master's students, but I also will occasionally see master's students as well. And if you have questions either throughout this presentation that are very specific to your situation, or just generally about how you can do this kind of planning, those appointments are perfect for that. So one thing, like I was saying, is trying to figure out how you can broaden your horizons. And of course, that can sound a lot easier said than done. But one thing I recommend is just considering all the ways you can be flexible once it is time for you to be applying for jobs. So maybe one thing is location. Maybe it's instead of location, the scope of jobs you're applying to, or applying to a bigger range of types of organizations. Maybe before you were just going to be looking at, you know, the Googles and Illuminas, and now it's spreading that you know, kind of optic lens to a range of small and medium and large well-known companies. And, you know, if it's something, depending on your situation, you might even start considering how to switch career fields for one that's a better economic forecast. That's not necessarily, you know, that's not necessarily something that most people are having to do. But for those who are, we, you know, at the Career Center work every day with people who are doing that and building skills in other areas. So, you know, at least to some extent, it might be a little bit, it might be a lot, broadening your search in some way is likely going to be necessary to really set yourself up for a range of options during, you know, again, this time of uncertainty. And then just keep thinking as you're going throughout your professional planning process and career search, think about, you know, how you can reassess what you can be flexible on. So maybe right now you can't be flexible on location, but down the road you can be. So yeah, so for those of you who are earlier in your program, use that time in front of you to think about a variety of career options. And again, we do a ton of career exploration things through the Career Center. So, you know, feel free to ask about what those things are, or ask about those in appointments. You can think about ways of how you can build skills in areas that you might need to venture into for the first time. For those of you who are closer to finishing up, you can still do this kind of planning work, but of course your timeline is going to be more compressed. So, you know, either way, again, I just want to plug the appointments, individual advising appointments at the Career Center. You can access those by going through Handshake. And actually right now I'll just put in the chat as well. It's just ucsd.joinhandshake.com, and then you can get to appointments from there. But yeah, so talking a little bit more about like how to figure out what kind of skills you need to broaden, things like that. On that, you know, on that note, we also always recommend that no matter where you're at in the job search, building a network is just really, really crucial. And this can be a way to figure out what kinds of skills you do need to build, depending on what field you're going into and depending on how close or distant that is to the field that you're currently in. It's, you know, networking has always been important to landing an internship or job. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about why networking, because I think a lot of people are familiar with, you know, that the fact that it's important in the first place, but I will spend some time on how to do that, because I think that's a lot of times where people feel less prepared. So of course, networking now is going to look a lot different than it used to, and I'm sure many of you are, you know, getting used to that already. So, you know, whereas before it might have been a lot of in-person events, obviously, so that's now turning into online or phone conversations. It's not always the case, but in many cases, a lot of networking is also turning into a much more individualized kind of process where, you know, maybe it used to be you would go to several events, like a biotech network would have an event or something like that. They're still doing that, but a lot of times now people are directly reaching out on LinkedIn, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and just asking for informational interviews, just essentially asking, how can I learn about your experience, and then applying it to my own. And I'll talk about more about the informational interviews in a moment. So, you know, before I even get into that though, I wanted to kind of back up and talk about how to even find people. You know, people are a lot of times people are like, okay, good, I understand, you know, that I need to network and why, but how do I even start? So first, I always recommend consider the people who are already in your life. In many cases, your first circle of contacts, and maybe it's faculty advisors or recent alumni friends or college friends, they can be a source of other contacts. So it's, in many cases, I would say in most cases, it's not necessarily who we know immediately who have like the job that you dream about, but it's more about who they know, and then maybe even who they know, and maybe even about who they know. So it can be kind of several layers deep. In fact, typically for PhD students especially, well, master's and PhD students especially, it's like the more nuanced it gets in terms of the types of roles you're looking for, then the more layers of contacts you might need to go through to find people who are truly working in an area that you want to work in and therefore could be of help specifically to your own job search. But initially, just think of who are some people who can put you in contact and get you closer to those people, even if it's not immediately, those aren't the people you would immediately learn firsthand from about those potential jobs. It's just that it's easier to start with a mutual acquaintance, because then that person, say you ask, say you're comfortable talking to your faculty advisor about this, and you ask your advisor, can you put me in touch with any alumni who have moved into industry and specifically work in, whatever pharma or something like that. If they happen to know somebody, then they can either say, sure, I'll write the introductory email, and then that's easy. Or they might give you a name, and then you can say, so-and-so recommended that I reach out to you. And it's just a lot more likely that people will reach back out to you if you have that kind of intermediary point. But if you don't have, if you truly are looking at all of your connections or thinking about everybody you know, and you're just like, no, I just don't know anybody even closely related to, what I want to go into or companies I want to go to. The next best thing is to connect to alumni from either UCSD or previous institutions that you've gone to. Here up on this slide, I have some examples of ways you can search for UCSD alumni. The first thing I wanted to mention is Triton's Connect. It's relatively recent, maybe about a year old or so. It's an alumni mentoring site specific to UCSD. So it's set up for alumni to join, and then really intended for them to network with each other, but also mentor current students. So you can just go to tritonsconnect.com and you just sign up for a profile there. And then basically, as soon as you sign up, it's free to do. It's pretty quick and easy. Then you can start searching in the directory and look up people at, again, either companies that you're interested in or types of positions, or maybe even if you have no idea, and you're thinking, oh, maybe I can get some ideas based on what people with my degree have gone on to do. You can search by academic degree and just kind of peruse that way as well. Because it is relatively new, they're still building the database. So it's the first thing I recommend, but I always also recommend using it in conjunction with LinkedIn. So, for LinkedIn right now, especially when you're doing the kind of professional planning and early networking, I think of LinkedIn as much more helpful as a research tool rather than getting really worried about if your LinkedIn profile looks good or not. I would say, if you have, either if you don't have a LinkedIn profile up or if it's just really bare bones, don't spend too much time and worry trying to make it perfect before you reach out to people. Really, all you need is a relatively professional looking photo, some information, in education, and a little bit in terms of your experience, and your graduate research experience does count as experience. And then you can just start using it to connect to people, because really, again, think of it as a connection tool. Think of it as a forum for you to be able to reach out and then find out from other people what they've done and how they've gotten there, rather than thinking, oh, they're going to be scrutinizing my LinkedIn profile, because that honestly doesn't actually happen that often. But in terms of actually finding people on LinkedIn, once you have that profile set up, if you haven't already, in the top toolbar, you can just type in UC San Diego. I would do it right now, but my internet will probably break on me right now if I try to go directly to the page. But basically, you just go to LinkedIn, top left-hand toolbar, so the search bar, look up University of California, San Diego, click on the school, and then here I have a picture where you scroll down to alumni, and then you can search all of the alumni all the UCSD alumni who are on LinkedIn, which is currently nearly 200,000, and just start searching again based on company or interest. You can type in kind of anything. I mean, even one student I was working with was interested in sleep research and typed in, use quote marks, sleep research, and found a bunch of people who are working on that. So be creative, think about what types of people you'd want to talk to, and then think about, again, who those people could connect you with as well. It can be helpful also to reach out to people in a variety of organizational levels. So it's really helpful to talk to people who are recent grads and have moved into their new role, because then you can learn from their experience. You know, what did they do that you can emulate in your application materials, for example, or how did they find out about a job, you know, that they're in, or something like that. But then also, if you're able to get in contact with people who are maybe more middle management or even upper level management, you know, who knows, who might be able to put you in contact with that person, then you can learn kind of a wider scope of the field, how that person moved up, what it looks like to move up in one's career field. So then you get like a broader view of how that industry is working. And then in all these conversations, you can ask those people, you know, what do you consider to be some of the most important skills that I would need if I were to go into this role? How would you suggest that I get them? Because, you know, one thing students ask me a lot is, oh, should I get a second master's, or should I get a certificate, or do I need the PhD? And that all depends on the role that you would be going for. And it's not necessarily the case that even if many people say, oh, you know, you really need a certificate in XYZ, or, you know, oh, I assume that if you're going to do something, you need to have a PhD. That's not necessarily the case, but you can find out whether it is the case by people who do actually work in those roles. They can give you really valuable information that can save you time and money, because, you know, again, it's not automatically the default that you do need that additional degree or certification. Maybe you just need some courses or something, or the opposite is true. Maybe you really do need that additional certification or degree or other way of proving a skill set, and you can get to work on that already, or even decide if that's the right fit for you. Personal example is I wanted to go into counseling when I was in my PhD. I was doing my PhD in English, and so really different, you know, PhD in English to counseling. And I kept being told, you know, and I did find out from my informational interviews, I really would need a master's in counseling to do the kind of counseling I was envisioning. And I was so done with school after. I was like, there's no way after my PhD that I'm going to go back for my master's and start this thing all over again. And that helped me decide I didn't want to do counseling per se. I wanted something really similar. So I thought about, what did I like about the idea of counseling? And what I really like is having the individual advising, where I help people figure out what they want to do and what works best for them. And lo and behold, I found that in this role. But I did not have to get a master's in counseling, because, you know, many places, including this place, recognizes that having a PhD and going through that experience actually is more helpful to helping PhDs than a master's in student affairs or in general psychological counseling or something. But that's something I would not have found out without talking to people in the field. I would have just assumed it was, you know, maybe I would have assumed it would have been okay, and I would have applied anyway and not heard anything back from the counseling jobs. Or maybe I would have eventually moved toward this, but thought maybe I do still need a master's, and maybe would have spent a lot of money and time on that if I'd gone that direction. So again, just think of these networking connections as really research building, not just laying seeds for people you can rely on later to refer you to, you know, potential roles and opportunities. But for now, they can really help shape your planning process in getting to what you do eventually want to do. So in terms of actually reaching out to people who you don't know, potentially, you know, again, it's easier if you have some mutual connection, but if you don't, just explain in your message, you know, say you find them on LinkedIn or Tritons Connect, or you're emailing, just explain really briefly who you are and why you're contacting them. And you want that why to be as specific as possible. So think of it from their perspective. You know, they want to know it's worth having a conversation with you, that you are reaching out to them in particular and not somebody else, because there's something about their experience that is worth it for you to talk about. So, you know, you might say, I'm a master's student in mechanical engineering, and I'm interested in roles doing X and Y, which looks very similar to the role that you have at ABC company. I'm wondering if you might have 15 to 20 minutes to talk to me about how you got into this role and what you do on a day-to-day basis. Again, fairly specific, so then they know you're not just cutting and pasting, even though you might be, you're reaching out to a lot of people, but it doesn't feel like you're just writing the same message to everybody and that you haven't done your research. So make it as specific as you can, but it doesn't have to be that long. You don't have to put too much effort into that. So here, I give an example on the next slide here. So this is just an example of an email that you can write. And again, these things that you're reaching out for, I mean, formally, they're called informational interviews. Really, they're just conversations about how people got into certain roles, what they recommend if you wanted to pursue a similar role. But also, if you talk to them, especially the first sets of people you talk to, you might find out like it's not what you thought it was, or it's just really not on target with what you're interested in. They can still be helpful in terms of asking them things like, do you have any contacts in whatever adjacent field that focuses more on the thing that you want to do. So if you end up talking to somebody and you realize they do a lot more, I don't know, like sales work than you'd ever want to do, but they also do a little bit of design, for example, then you might say, do you know anybody who works, a little bit less on the sales side, but a little bit more on the design side, who you can put me in contact with? And then that just kind of continues, like getting the ball rolling, where again, now you have that mutual connection point, and you can then reach out to that next person and say, I talked to so-and-so and they recommended that I reach out to you, and then you kind of start that process over again. As you can see, as I'm talking through all of this, it can take some time, definitely, especially for any of you who may be staring down the barrel of the job market, you might think like, I just don't have time for this. And it's true, it does take some time. It can take some time for things to pick up at first as well, where you're finding like the right people to talk to and figuring out those referrals and stuff like that. But it does end up paying off. I mean, I will say that many students, when I meet with them and they say, oh, I've been applying and I haven't heard back, I don't think I've ever talked to somebody who, when I said, oh, have you connected with anybody in the field? I don't think anybody has said, oh yeah, and then they've had like a pretty good network. Most of those people have just been like applying and sending things out into thin air, and you don't know where it lands, after that. But the people who are successful usually have some kind of network built up. Again, not necessarily because somebody, pushed their materials through to the hiring manager. In some cases that did happen, but in a lot of cases, it's just because they learned things from those conversations that helped them tailor their materials, help them really stand out. And essentially it gave them the research to move more quickly through the job search. So again, even if you're really close to searching for a role, try to include some of this as you're applying for things, because it's not mutually exclusive by any means. This should be like a side-by-side process where you're applying and trying to talk to people in the field. And then if you're earlier on in your planning process, then that of course gives you more time to focus on this networking piece first before you're actually sending out the application materials. And one thing I'll spend a little bit of time in a moment will be, so this script and this information here on informational interviews comes from a site called Imagine PhD. Here's an image of that there. As you'll notice here, you're probably like, why is this being presented here? Career planning tool for humanities and social sciences. That being said, and I'll log in a moment, and hopefully it shows. Sinai or anybody, can you see Imagine PhD? I'm not sure if it's showing the right screen. If not, I'll reshare.
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So yeah, as you'll see, while much of it is tailored to humanities and social sciences PhDs, I would say at least half of it is just general and just generally helpful for grad students. So for one thing, if you create an account, which again is totally free, just imaginephd.com, you go to the general resources, just skip the job family resources for now, but general resources and informational interviewing. So all that stuff I was talking about just now in terms of how to reach out and all that, really extensive handout here. In fact, it's 5 pages, gives you sample questions, sample email to write, how to wrap up, how to stay in contact, all of that. And then as you can see, cover letter, job offer. And again, this is not particular, this stuff here, all of this is not particular just to humanities and social sciences, it's for everybody. So I would definitely, LinkedIn, I would definitely recommend making an account, if only for that. But then also in terms of those professional plans, there's this My Plan tool here, which is really helpful. As you can see, you can break things up depending on what the goal is. So for funding, for example, if you were to add a new goal, I mean, I remember when I was applying for
I
fellowship.
don't think we can see your screen. I just see a poster for Imagine PhD.
Oh no, okay, let me, oh, thank you for telling me that. Let me stop the share and reshare. It didn't transfer over, thank you. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, can you see this now? The
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for telling me. Let me go back and show you really fast then to the very beginning. Yeah, so once you create an account here, it's free to sign up. So you just, just sign in there. And then you'd go to resources, general resources. And then again, just to show you quickly what I went over a minute ago, informational interviewing gives you pretty detailed handout with some questions you can ask and how to follow up, along with a lot of other handouts that are generally helpful. And then going back to my plan, one other thing that's helpful for all students is you can create any kind of goals and set reminders for yourself. So again, funding, maybe you want to apply for a fellowship that will make you competitive for certain roles. I know when I was applying for fellowships, I would see things come out, but I wasn't eligible to apply for maybe a year or two. But I always wondered, like, how am I going to remember to apply? You know, if it's due January 1st, 2023 or something. Well, here you can actually use that. So you can put in, you know, whatever fellowship, and you want to send yourself a reminder on a certain date, then you can set that. You know, 2 years from now, your future self will thank you because you've set a reminder for yourself that you want to apply for a certain fellowship that you're finally eligible for. So I recommend that for that. But then also, you know, there's this career development tab here where you can also set goals. And I always recommend like micro goals. Essentially, think about how you can break this down into achievable things. So a lot of times people, I'll hear them set a goal and they're like, my goal is to have, you know, contact 10 alumni and get 1 referral or something like that. And they're like, it's achievable because I'm only asking for 1 referral. But actually there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, you're researching who those alumni are, you're writing the, you know, each of the emails or the messages, you know, trying to figure out like what you're actually talk about. There's just like a lot of prep work, you know, you're maybe even figure out, who knows, maybe even figuring out which industry you want those alumni to be in. So it can become pretty overwhelming if the goal is too big. Instead, if you really break it up into small goals, like, for example, look up alumni, even that can be more specific. Maybe you look up 2 alumni in whatever field it is on LinkedIn and then find 5 additional ones to email or something like that. You know, even just finding people takes time. Then the next goal might be email 3 alumni. Maybe the next goal is follow up on emails, you know, if you haven't heard back from any of them. The next goal is send thank you note after a conversation if you had a conversation. So, you know, just think of this tool as something that can really help you break things out as you're looking ahead. And again, even for your own academic goals, you can create things too. So you remember, maybe you're looking at journals to submit articles to, and you're trying to remember, you know, remind yourself which journals those are or something, or you need to put together your committee, all of that. So I really recommend this site. So before I move on, any questions about what I've gone over so far? And while I do that, while I wait, I'm going to reshare my slides. Okay, let's see. Okay, can you see back to the slide with Imagine PhD? Or does anybody?
Yeah, it has just the picture.
Okay, perfect. Yes, that's great. Okay, because I was going to go back to the, so now you can see the thing on tailoring materials?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so before I start with the rest of this, any questions in the meantime? Okay, well, feel free to break in if something comes up. But anyway, so going back, I know there's a lot on informational interviews and networking. Again, most of my appointments and presentations do focus on that because it can be such a crucial part of the job search, from everything from learning about how to get into a certain role to how to interview effectively, to, how to negotiate a job offer. I've even had, recently I worked with a student who was able to get a $20,000 raise in her job offer because she had talked to alumni who then said, oh yeah, they're lowballing you. This is what a PhD in your field should actually be asking for, or should be getting for this particular offer. So, just think of the whole spectrum of what building a network can help with. Even if you do have a fairly short timeline, you can still do that alongside your applications. So then, speaking of applications, another thing I recommend in this job market in particular is really spending time tailoring your materials. Again, not new information, something I've recommended before, but particularly now when you're really trying to stand out among a lot of applicants, it just means spending even more time on your materials to make sure that it gets past that first screen. So what I mean by that is really thinking about what is, if you're applying for a specific role, what is in that internship or job posting that, those keywords that keep coming up that you want to integrate. So for example, do they mention certain programming skills? Do they say that you need to have Python and C++ proficiency or something? If you have that, then you want to make sure that that shows up. So you would say use Python to do XYZ, or to, whatever it is that you would use it to describe, or you would list those skills in the skills section. If they say, a requirement is demonstrated experience in something, then how they're phrasing that thing, you want, again, your materials to reflect that. A lot of times for grad students, this can come down to how to rephrase your experience to make it clearer to somebody who's not an expert in that field that you've actually done that work. A lot of times the grad student's resume can be really highly technical. So, it's not uncommon for me to see like a string of, symbols and alphabet and numbers for, like chemical symbols and things like that. And it essentially is demonstrating the experience that the job ad is asking for, but somebody who isn't an expert in material science or, whatever that field is, isn't necessarily going to know that. And so for one thing, if you're applying for a large company that is using an online applicant tracking system, like where they're matching keywords, that means that it might not go through. And then also, even if it's in the more likely case, it's a human who's reviewing it. And the first stop, HR people are highly trained, but they're highly trained in their field. They probably know a lot about the company, but again, it's more often than not the case that their background is, for example, English literature or history, or it could be biological sciences, or, but they're not necessarily going to know that if you have something highly specific, that it means the same thing that the job ad is asking for. All they're doing is comparing your materials with the job or internship ad that they have in front of them. So then really a lot of it is just kind of translating that language into some of the most important words that they are using in the job ad. And even if you're at the point where it's too early for you to be applying for either, jobs or even internships, if you have a good idea of what kind of field or fields that you're looking into, you can still get a sense by looking at, maybe a batch of 5 to 7 sample jobs and just look through it, see which words keep coming up over and over again to give you a sense of what is likely to come up in the internships and jobs you would apply for. So this is something I recommend, especially if you're going to go to like a general networking event or a career fair, or say a friend says, hey, I know somebody who knows somebody, can you send me your resume? And you're not even sure what exactly, there is no job ad for send me your resume. I might be able to find something for you, right? So in those cases, that's where I say looking at a bunch of sample job ads, maybe they expired, maybe they're over in Alaska, like whatever. They're not things you would actually apply for, but they give you a sense of what is it people in the industry are looking for. And then you can emulate that, again, and then at least it's tailored to enough of a degree that people who are generally reviewing it or seeing if there's something that you might be a fit for in that company, or, for that general internship, that somebody is advertising at a virtual career fair or something, that at least helps tailor it sufficiently so they see there are those matches there. And then, you know, also going back to Imagine PhD, it gives a lot of in-depth resources on what it looks like to tailor. Those are under the resources that are a little bit more specific to humanities and social sciences, but at least it gives you a model. So you can go back on Imagine PhD, looking under their resources for the specific job families. And, you know, I would say click on anything, even if it's not something you'd want to go into. It could be, you know, one of their resources is advocacy. It doesn't matter what it is. It's more like you get to the area where they have a sample job ad, sample resume, and sample cover letter, and it highlights, it gives you examples of what it looks like to tailor material so they match the job ad. So, you know, again, it's more like an exercise to see what that may look like. So before I move on, any questions about that whole process? I'll pause here for a little bit just because I know that sometimes it can take a little bit for questions to arise. Okay, so one other thing that I also recommend is just being persistent, you know, so for the whole planning process, generally speaking, but especially during COVID, during these times, it's always been an important thing. It sounds very trite because everybody says like, oh, keep being persistent. But really, I mean it for all levels. So if you are, you know, trying to connect with people and you're in that phase, be persistent in terms of sending a reminder connection notice or email or something. You know, people are, especially now, just totally overwhelmed by, well, everything, but you know, specifically they can be overwhelmed by their inbox. And so it's not, you know, being too pushy to just send a reminder a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, and say, hey, I'm not sure if you received my previous email. I'm forwarding it here just in case. Please let me know if you have a few minutes to talk. If you don't hear back from them after, you know, that first reminder email, maybe 2 reminder emails if you really, really want to talk to them. But, you know, if you don't hear back, then that's okay, you know, move on to other people, but it's worth at least one reminder email. And then, you know, persistence in terms of the rest of the search. You know, going through a search generally can be grueling, especially if it's a long search. But just keep in mind that rejection is like, it sounds like, again, kind of, you know, trite, so it's often repeated, rejection is part of the process, but it is part of the process. I mean, I don't know anybody who has had a job search that consisted of one application, which was immediately accepted, and then they went through the interview and got hired for the role. I would be surprised if any of you knew that, you know, that person as well. And if you did, you know, I want to meet that person. Just, you know, expect you're going to get likely many more rejections than you will get, you know, moved along through the hiring process. And that can be really deflating. But just try to not take that personally. Just think about what information does it give you that you can use. So it might be that if you were rejected at the the resume stage, maybe if you're getting a lot of those, you know, if it's just a few, okay, that's what happened. But if it's a lot of those, then okay, maybe it's time to think about how you might need to work on your resume. If you're getting a lot of interviews, but you're not moving past that, maybe it's something about interviewing. If, you know, you have an interview and it just feels off and you feel like you have to be somebody you're not, you know, and then you think back, I've had this experience, you think back like, oh, if only I'd answered this question a certain way, or if only I'd been more like whatever that kind of culture is. It's not always, you know, it's always also a two-way street. So it's also thinking about like, what are misalignments, if that's happening, between yourself and that company culture. It might not have been a good fit in the end. And what can you learn from that? You know, okay, learning that maybe that company culture, whatever that thing was about the company culture, is something you don't want to see. And how can you ask, you know, go back to your network and ask people for a culture that has more of something else or less of that thing that you picked up in the interview. So again, just think of this whole thing as a learning process. And, you know, throughout the process, you know, you might have to also, it's like a balance of persistence and setting limits. So, you know, that sounds kind of contradictory, but it can also, to set limits for yourself can give you some sense of control. So for example, if you're really focusing on the academic market, you might give yourself a limit of, okay, I'll let myself apply for how many cycles, or I want to do a postdoc for 2 years, and this is what I want to get out of my postdoc. And after that, I'll let myself be on the academic market for 1 year, and then after that, I'll look for other things. So I think just like setting up these plans for yourself can help you have your own control over the job process itself, which can help, again, you navigate this entire process. And then last thing I tend to recommend is, especially now, think about the long career arc, plural careers that you'll be having. So, a lot of times my grad students are worried about, what if I choose something that's wrong? What if whatever I get into next isn't the right fit and I've chosen wrong and I regret that? I think there's a concern sometimes that whatever you choose next will be kind of the be all end all, and certainly academia can make us feel that way, because in academia the old style of academia, at least, can be fairly straight and narrow, though even that's changing nowadays. But honestly, most careers, it's just really your next step that you're choosing. It's not all the subsequent steps. One piece of advice that I keep repeating is, I like the conception that I've heard from another advisor, that think of your career as a book with many chapters. So you're just choosing the next chapter. And depending on where you're at, and depending on your field, and depending on how well hiring looks like right now, or not good, or whatever that looks like, your next step might be a just survival job. You're just getting something because you're graduating in a month and you need to start paying down, I don't know, student loans, and like have an income for the next 6 months or something. And then you use that time to invest in choosing the step that you would have wanted to take if you'd had more time. And then that's fine. You're just choosing your next step. It's not, it's not that whatever you choose is going to force you into this kind of career path, or that people are going to look at your resume and go, oh, it's, because you did this thing, that you're not prepared for something else. So I would kind of think about, again, just what can you do now that's within your limits, your control, within your best interests, that will set you up for your eventual goals. And right now it might be that you have enough time to do all the things that I just suggested and build that strong network. It might be the opposite, that you don't have much time, and then we think about, okay, how can you do some planning for the short term and then also the long term to get you back to whatever your plan A was in the first place. And then sometimes, I talk to alumni and they never got back to plan A, but they're actually happier doing whatever they did instead. And they don't even want to go back to plan A in the end. So, there can be that as well. So just know that there are a lot of different options. You're not setting yourself up for just one potential career arc. And then also in the Career Center, what I'll end with is just our resources. We have advising, after graduation as well. So especially when you're a grad student, it can be hard to think about applying for jobs and getting all your materials ready and things like that, while you're also trying to defend and get everything, all your experiments done. So, do know that we have individual advising up to a year after graduation. And then all of our online resources, all of our events, those are available for life. So but when we're back in person, even our events, that's available for life. But even, now especially, it's even easier. If you need any webinars or anything like that, those are posted on Handshake. And same with searching for jobs on Handshake or internships and things like that. Another thing I recommend is Science Careers has some really good advice articles and things tailored specifically for more of the STEM and engineering experience. And then also Inside Higher Ed has a really helpful set of career advice columns written by people who work in graduate career advising specifically, that, that gives tips on converting the CV to a resume, or how to translate your academic work into an industry role or something like that. And again, I went over trying to connect and imagine PhD, so I won't talk too much more about those. But just in the last few minutes, I wanted to open this up and see if there are any questions. I'm going to stop sharing so then I can see all of you, and let me know if my voice gets all pixelated or something, but I'll turn my camera back on for now in case there are any questions. And feel free to either write those in the chat or unmute yourself.
If we wanted to, I guess, get an appointment one-on-one to go over cover letters, is that available just online?
Yeah, totally. Let me actually, I'm going to bring up the direct appointment link. Just a moment. So yeah, so for appointments, it's like anything, so it can be anything from career exploration to I review, cover letters and resumes. Sorry, I'm just gonna pull up the link really fast so you can directly book an appointment. To interviewing strategies and job offer negotiations, so all of that. Let me just put this in the chat here. And then if you look on Handshake and you don't see any appointments that work for you, just send an email to gradcareers@ucsd.edu. And then we can schedule an appointment outside of what's on Handshake too.
I didn't see anything in the chat.
Oh, so weird, it's not coming. Oh, it's going to panelists, that is why. Thank you for
no worries.
Letting me know. And that makes me realize that the other things didn't go through chat either. So, okay, yeah, good. So I gave you the John. Do you see that now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So that's the appointment. And then underneath is the email address if you can't find anything that works for you. We only put for Handshake our availability up to about a week, sometimes 2 weeks in advance. So, of course, grad students like planning ahead a little bit more. So if you don't see anything, like I said, just send an email.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I don't think.
Hi. So you can go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying, I didn't see anything, so this is perfect. Please, yeah, go ahead, please.
I thought I heard somebody else. So I think for a lot of us, like for me, I went from my bachelor's straight into my master's, and then I'm graduating in December. So it being sort of like, plopped out into the proverbial workforce as a non-student, this is like the first time that it's like, now go swim in the deep end.
Right, right.
So this is kind of like, we don't know whether this is a good or bad situation. I take it this is a non-good situation comparable to 2008. Am I correct in that assessment?
You mean the economic forecast compared to 2008?
Yes, the difficulty in the job search.
Yeah. It honestly can really, this is going to sound like a non-answer. It can depend on the field. Definitely there are certain fields that are decidedly worse than 2008 and certain fields that are not being hit as hard as I saw in 2008. What kinds of, are you thinking of industry specifically? Or are you looking more into like academic?
For me, it's definitely industry. I just came to get my master's, and then I saw the hard knock life of PhD students, and I said no. And I'm like, I'm gonna go work 9 to 5 instead of working like 8 to 11 p.m. at night.
Right.
But anyways, for me, it's structural engineering. That's what I'm getting my master's in, and I do understand there's a distinction, say, between design work and say construction. Yeah. Construction, that's from what I understand, that's going right along fine. But like design work, say a school district is like, oh, we don't know what the situation is going to be a year from now, so we're not going to put out a project to bid at this moment.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, that does go in. It's hard, especially when, like I said, you have a short time frame. So a couple things. For one thing, I would say definitely please set up an appointment if you haven't already through Handshake, or let me know if you have already and you have more questions, and reach out on that email address. Couple things. So if you are in a field that has a really bad, like a pretty bad job market right now, but you're also up against that tight time frame. That is where, like, going back to that thing about consider the long arc of your career path, that is where it's like, okay, for financial stability, you take something while you're also using that buffer that it's buying you to do that longer term work that's getting you toward either making inroads enough in that field so that you're competitive even among the hordes of other people who are potentially applying, or building skills in something that's closely adjacent, something still of interest, but adjacent enough. So, but maybe you have some skills you need to build, or a little bit, you know, of project work you can do on the side or something like that, to then set yourself up for that course. That's a general overview. It's a lot more nuanced than that. And so that's why I think unemployment would be helpful, but it's basically weighing what are your hard stops. It's like, it can take a lot of time to develop those networks, but you have the hard stop of a certain deadline. How can you create some room for yourself through that, you know, what I call kind of like the survival job, to have the stopgap that allows you to do the longer term work of, again, like reposition yourself for a role, or for an industry that's doing better than, for example, you know, like design structural engineering work may be doing. Again, really highly dependent on the industry. And it's hard to say, like, yeah, in some ways, like I said, right now looks worse, and in other ways it looks better, or at least not as long-term. So it really, really depends. I don't know. I know that wasn't much of an answer, but did it give you some starting points at least?
No, thank you. That was enough.
Okay, yeah. Okay, cool.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sure. Thanks for the question. Any other questions? Okay, I don't think I see anything. Nothing in the chat. Okay, so I'll just close this by saying again, please, you know, feel free to set up an advising appointment, or reach out, you know, on email if you don't see anything that works for you. And it's been great presenting to you. So thanks for some really good questions as well. And I hope that we'll see you soon. See you, you know, over video, or on the phone, or however, through the Career Center.
Thank you, Julia. This is really great.
Thanks so much for inviting me to this. Okay, we'll talk to you all later. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.